Good evening and welcome to ILTV Weekly. Joining me today are former Knesset member Rabbi Dov Lipman from Yesh Atid and Dr. Martin Sherman, director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. This week we'll look toward Gaza, where tensions are rising in the aftermath of the assassination of a major Hamas figure by an unknown gunman. We'll also take a look at the 19-year-old Israeli who lives in the south, who's emerged as the lead suspect in a series of bomb threats against Jewish community centers in the United States. But we open in Washington, where the Israeli lobby AIPAC meets for the first time in the post-Obama era of President Trump. AIPAC has endured several years of turbulence over its positions on the Iranian deal and the fate of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Now it seeks to reforge its bipartisan congressional support while pushing for legislation targeting Iran's non-nuclear activities, including ballistic missile testing and state support for terrorism. AIPAC claims it will reiterate its support for a two-state solution with the Palestinians. Before beginning our discussion, these comments to AIPAC from Israeli Ambassador to the United States Ron Dermer and U.S. Vice President Mike Pence.
And under President Donald Trump, if the world knows nothing else, the world will know this: America stands with Israel. And know this, after decades of simply talking about it, the President of the United States is giving serious consideration to moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And in President Trump, America has a leader who will call our enemies by their name. Just last week in London, in the shadow of Parliament, radical Islamic terrorism reared its ugly head, claiming the lives of innocent civilians, including an American. At this very moment, our administration is crafting plans to defeat radical Islamic terrorism so it can no longer bring violence to our enemies, to our allies, or inspire violence here at home. And let me be clear, President Trump is working with our military, and the American people can know this. We will hunt down and destroy ISIS at its source so it can no longer threaten our people, our allies, or our most cherished ally, Israel.
When it comes to the great challenges facing Israel and the United States, for the first time in many years, perhaps even many decades, there is no daylight between our two governments. Both our governments recognize that foremost among those challenges remains Iran. We both recognize that the nuclear deal does not block Iran's path to a bomb, and that Iran's appetite for aggression and terror has only grown since that deal was signed and since sanctions were removed. We also both recognize that the worst outcome that could emerge from the horrific carnage in Syria would be to effectively cede parts of Syria to Iran and Hezbollah. And we both appreciate that the rising tide of militant Islam, which has engulfed the Middle East, has also enabled a rare moment of opportunity to bring Israel and many in the Arab world closer together. In working together to thwart common dangers, there is a real prospect of building a genuine path towards reconciliation in the region, a path not based on empty hopes and dangerous illusions, but a path based on a clear-eyed understanding of shared threats, as well as a common desire for a safer, more prosperous, and more peaceful future.
Rabbi Lipman, Ambassador Dermer says that for the first time in years, there is no daylight whatever between Washington and Jerusalem. You agree?
If there's no daylight between the two governments, they don't have to announce that there's no daylight between the two governments. Everyone would see how everything's working in total consonance.
You don't buy it?
Israel's, no, I don't buy it. I understand why he has to say it. And there's certainly a shift in terms of a more friendly atmosphere, a warmer atmosphere, a closer connection. There's no doubt there's a shift there. But when it comes to policy, when it comes to what will happen on the ground, that's where there certainly is a gap, and that's what they're trying to work out.
On the Palestinian-Israeli issue?
On the Palestinian issue, first and foremost. But even to hear the Vice President to say that after decades of talking about it, we're now considering it. There's a gap that's there, and I understand that the Trump administration is formulating its policy and trying to understand exactly what it wants, but no one should fall into any illusion that it's going to be exactly what Israel wants. Again, there's dialogue, there's conversation, there's warmness, there's friendship, but there is a gap.
Dr. Sherman, Ambassador Dermer said that it's a rare moment in history that allows Israel and the Arab world to work together for reconciliation in the region. What do you think?
Well, before I answer that question, just let me pick up on what Rabbi Lippman said about no daylight. If we're going to say there's no daylight between the American position and the Israeli position, that presupposes that Israel has a position, which I find rather difficult to identify, because Israel's position keeps moving. So, I think it would be far more effective.
It keeps moving, or
keeps moving.
It's never actually announced?
Well, both. I mean, if you remember, over the years, support for a Palestinian state was borderline sedition. Today, it's become the mainstream, the mainstream policy of the Israeli government. It was the same thing when Netanyahu embraced the Bar Ilan speech. So the Israeli policy keeps on moving. And if you were today to ask what is Israel's vision of the final status arrangement, I don't think anyone could tell you. So at least on the Palestinian issue, I think that it would be nice if Israel would actually have a clear position between which there may or may not be daylight. I think on the Iranian issue, there's probably far more consensus, especially compared to the previous administration. And I think that whilst it's true that there is certainly a change for the better in the ambience, I still think that we should be skeptical about the substance. I'm very skeptical about it. I think that at the moment there are common threats, but I would be very wary of tying Israel's long-term strategic fate to anything in the Arab world which consists of collapsing states and the most decadent and corrupt states whose shelf life is very short, or maybe short, at least questionable. So I'm very skeptical about this long-term strategic alliance with the so-called moderate states, because who are the moderate states? Saudi Arabia. The only thing moderate about Saudi Arabia isn't Iran. It's the cradle of Wahhabism. So I'm very skeptical about finding a long-term strategic alliance with the Islamic world.
All right, Rabbi, the AIPAC traditionally, over the last years certainly, has supported the idea of territorial compromise, two-state solution. Neither Pence nor Netanyahu mentioned it in their comments. Do you expect that Netanyahu will say something when he addresses AIPAC?
I think he's going to have to address it some way, somehow. This is the area where that gap exists. Now, AIPAC, I know they're doing everything they can to try to have this unified voice, especially after damage that was done in the past. And I've even been looking at the schedule. There's people from all parts of the spectrum, the political spectrum, even from Israel, that are presenting there. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think it's important that AIPAC be a platform for all different voices of Israel to be expressed, but then also to come together and say, but one thing is for sure is that we stand behind Israel and its democratically elected government. In terms of what the Prime Minister will or won't say, I'm not sure. If I can just say one thing, I will say that I do believe that we have to work with I don't call them moderate states, but stability-seeking Arab states in the region. This is where we are. We can't say, okay, we'll be our little island by ourselves, and if we do have any opportunities to work together with those around us, we should do so, and that's something which should be embraced. The Prime Minister will definitely talk about that opportunity.
Dr. Sherman, we heard Mike Pence mention the embassy move once again. Kind of sounded like a campaign slogan, but they're in office now. They can do it if they want to. And also, we've noticed that the Trump administration is continuously criticizing Israel over settlement policy several times now in the last month. So where are they really at?
Well, my take on it is that Israel may have missed a moment here. I think that if they had approached the Trump administration with a far more robust and assertive position, they would have had a different response. Because Netanyahu gave the impression that he was reverting to his Bar Ilan speech, embracing the two-state solution. If you embrace a two-state solution, then settlements are a bit discordant, certainly outside the settlement bloc. So I think Israel missed a moment here by being a bit reticent and not being forceful enough in presenting a more assertive point of view. So I think Israel bears some of the onus for any backtracking that we might see in Trump's position relative to his election pledges. The other question.
Well, no, unfortunately, we have to move on to Gaza at this point. Mazen Fakha was a former security prisoner in Israel who was released but banished to Gaza in the Gilad Shalit exchange, where he returned to terrorism as the commander of Hamas efforts to coordinate terror attacks in the West Bank. He was assassinated this weekend in Gaza. Hamas is pointing a finger at Israel and is threatening to get revenge. Let's hear a few comments from Gaza.
هذه العمليات لا تثنينا ولا تؤخرنا ولا تعطلنا. سنضرب بيد من حديد على كل العملاء والخونة سواء كانوا في أجهزة أمنية أو في غيرها حتى نحصن شعبنا ورجال المقاومة من هذه الجرائم المنكرة.
نحن نعتقد أن هذه هي عملية اغتيال كاملة الأركان بالشكل والمضمون، والمستفيد الوحيد من عملية اغتيال هذا المجاهد لا توجد جهة إلا الاحتلال، والجهات الأمنية تتابع وتدقق في الموضوع. ننتظر ما تسفر عنه هذه التحقيقات، لكن نحن نقول لا جهة مستفيدة من اغتيال أحد مجاهدي الشعب الفلسطيني إلا الاحتلال.
Dr. Sherman, you've had experience in the intelligence community. If you were a betting man, would you say that Israel was behind this assassination?
Well, I don't want to make any unsubstantiated assessments, but it wouldn't be the first time that a Palestinian has been eliminated by someone who wasn't an Israeli. I would find it difficult to believe that this was actually a direct Israeli assassination. Perhaps it was using intermediaries. But this brings up the question of the entire policy of targeted assassinations. And it's a little like swatting the mosquitoes rather than draining the swamps. And, over the years, there have been some spectacular assassinations. It hasn't really done much to bring the end of the conflict. And I think Israel needs a far more comprehensive draining the swamp strategy rather than
Eliminating Hamas?
Eliminating Hamas, but you can only do that if you look at the Palestinian people not as the victims of these cruel terrorist organizations, but as the crucible from which they emerge. And unless you recognize that the conflict is not a conflict between a few bad guys in Israel, but a conflict between two collectives, and at the end, one collective has to be victorious and the other one has to be vanquished. That is, in my opinion, the only intellectual approach that can bring some sort of cessation to the hostilities.
Rabbi, we've had several rounds of wars with Gaza now. What, if anything, I mean, we withdrew from the Gaza Strip. We pulled out of Gush Katif and so on. There are no Israelis living there. What could Israel be doing to lessen the chance of another war?
I mean, far be it from me to suggest that we could be doing something better
What
than the
can we do
current
better?
situation. It's anyone who suggests go into Gaza and conquer it and vanquish the Palestinian people. I mean, these kinds of terminologies to me are just throwing things out there. We're going to take control over the Gaza Strip and now be responsible for 2 million people's health and education. And how many soldiers, according to the assessments, do we lose in the process of doing that? We can do what we want to do. The question is, what have you accomplished along the way? In terms of Gaza, I personally believe we can actually do more on the humanitarian side. We're doing a lot, and there's a lot of misinformation in the world out there. But the idea, which even the Likud government has talked about building the port, giving more humanitarian aid, opening things up even more, those are things which could be helpful in terms of not enabling Hamas to rally the forces there to really go against Israel. But it's an almost impossible situation, and anyone who suggested there's some kind of a magic way that we can end it. Now, if we do reach out to the stability-seeking Arab states in the region, and we're talking about a regional solution to a lot of the issues, we could bring Gaza into that and link any humanitarian aid to the dismantling of the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. That's something which we
You'd
can
favor
do.
building a port there or allowing a port to be built?
100% in the right. In other words, if we're thinking about it in a comprehensive way, we can deal with that as well. But to deal with Gaza individually without looking at it as a regional problem, it won't work. Bring Egypt into the picture, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, then we have some kind of a shot at reaching some kind of a situation where we're reducing the tensions and the flames.
So I must interject. I think this is a suggestion of building a port is total insanity. Apart from the ecological implications, which have horrendous impact on the Israeli beaches north of Gaza, Gaza already has a port, Ashdod. Ashdod, in times of peace, can bring in all of Gaza's needs. Now, if you have peace, you don't need a port. And if you have hostilities, do you want to give them a port? I mean, you know, I can find absolutely no logic, no rationale in the suggestion of a port. And as far as humanitarian aid goes, humanitarian aid is only perpetuating the problem. Only perpetuating the problem, because we go in, we have a war, there's devastation, then there's humanitarian aid, the Hamas take over again, and there's devastation again. This is not a policy that can bring any more success than we've had up to now. You know,
You're suggesting that we cut off humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza?
I suggest we cut off humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza.
Wow.
But
I don't know what a Jewish state means.
No, excuse me, let me finish. I suggest we terminate humanitarian aid to Gaza and offer non-belligerent Palestinians generous relocation loans. Because today, if you look what's happening in Gaza, the Gazans are paying smugglers to get them out. So what I'm saying is, there will never be a solution to Gaza as long as you have a large Arab concentration where Gaza is situated today.
Relocation to where?
To wherever they like.
Because the world is opening up their arms to 2 million people in Gaza?
No, the population flows involved in relocating the Gaza population are insignificant compared to global population moves. You know, you could have asked that question before the Syrian war. But I'm not talking about moving out millions of people who are impoverished and destitute. I'm talking about moving out a given number of people who are well-funded and under regulated conditions. Why would that not happen? You know, I could tell you stories, I don't know if we have time, about a discussion I had with an Indian politician, and he said, tell me, how many Palestinians are? And I said, 5,000. About 5 million. No one thinks it's more than 5 million. He says, 5 million, is that all we could take them? In terms of global population flows, it's insignificant. All it requires is political resolve.
Okay.
All right, well, let's move on to an issue that shocked many in Israel when we learned that the alleged culprit in more than 100 bomb threats on Jewish community centers in the United States was carried out by a 19-year-old American born in Israel, an American Jew living in the south of the country. Let's hear from the suspect's lawyer and from the head of the Israeli Police National Cyber Unit.
Today, after conducting a full investigation in the last months, the Israeli National Police has arrested a suspect of conducting threat calls to organizations all over the world, threatening to have bombs in schools and other facilities around the world.
This is a young person that, because of his very, very serious medical condition, didn't serve in the army, didn't go to high school, didn't go to elementary school. So that's why the medical condition can actually affect the investigation. And this is one of the things the judge told the police to check, to talk to his doctors, to get more documents, and to investigate him according to his medical situation. I already told that when he was arrested with another suspect, and now the police need to investigate to see who is the person who actually did this or was responsible to this event.
Dov, I think you represent the best of American Jewry that comes here. You were elected to the Knesset, one of very few that was. This young man perhaps is representing some of the worst of American Jews that come live in this country. What could possibly be his motivation?
I have no idea. We don't know the full story, and that's why there's a police process to be able to clarify that. And therefore, any speculation at this point is very, very difficult. But I actually view this story, and with the tragedy involved in this young man being involved in this, but look at the cooperation between the FBI and the Israeli police. Look at the ability of two governments to be able to work together, all emotions aside. No one's casting blame on anybody else. No one's saying now Israel's at fault. We work together, there was a crime that was committed, we arrest the person, and now they'll be prosecuted and go through the judicial system. That's something to celebrate in terms of our ability to work together. And in terms of what exactly happened, what's behind the story, we'll have to wait to see how that plays out.
Dr. Sherman, some weeks ago, when these threats were being made against the Jewish community centers, I was among those that was saying Donald Trump's got to speak out. This is, kind of a result of the anti-Semitic, right-wing supporters of his who are going after the Jews and so on. Do we owe Donald Trump an apology?
Well, that's a good point. Could you just imagine what would have happened if Donald Trump had come out with a declaration 2 weeks ago, before the FBI had actually confirmed it, that most of the anti-Semitic threats were from an American Israeli Jew? You can imagine the outcry.
He actually did make a comment where people looked at as a very curious
Yes,
comment to a group of attorney generals,
yeah.
in which he said it's coming from the other side.
Yeah.
People didn't know what he meant.
Yeah, but so that shows you how you have to be very careful about when your criticism, because here truth is stranger than fiction, and if he had to come out of that, he would have been excoriated. He would have been slaughtered by the press. But I think in the anti-Semitism issue, I think we're ignoring the major source of anti-Semitism, which doesn't come from the hard fascist right, but comes from the Islamic and the Islamic and their partners on the left. There's far more Judophobic rhetoric in the mosques, etc., than there is in most other quarters, and you see what's happening in Europe, and I think that's the kind of phenomena that you have to worry about sprouting up in the United States.
Dov, you spend a lot of time in the States. You were a rabbi in the States. In addition to this hoax on the JCC bombing threats, there was also a cemetery in Brooklyn where it turned out that it was just weather that caused these tombstones to fall down and so on. Is ADL and some of these other groups exaggerating the threat of anti-Semitism in the United States, maybe to raise money?
I do think that sometimes we have organizations which very much thrive off of anti-Semitism and other things, and almost need to have it to exist. I saw a comedian talking about...
If not, why do we need ADL?
Right. We hear so much about anti-Semitism. We want to hear some pro-Semitism. Like, where's that come? I think that we do jump very quickly. On the other hand, it is something to always be on the lookout for. And yes, I'm not in any way blaming a president of the United States, but I think historically we've seen administrations stand with the Jewish people and certainly work to try to stop this from happening. And that's certainly what we would expect to happen over here. But I don't necessarily see that there's any specific rise from this place or that place that's happening. We have to be on the lookout on both extremes. There's always extremes that are speaking out. There's always extremes that are concerned about, that are speaking out against the minorities, and certainly the Jewish people will fall immediately into that. And Israel together, the United States should work together to root out any of that anti-Semitism. That's the way we should move forward.
Well, let me ask you both. Are things changing in the United States so that the American Jewish community maybe doesn't feel as secure as it once did, and that maybe also combined with economic opportunities here in Israel, that we might see a larger number of immigrants coming from the West, from the United States in the coming years?
Well, I think the short answer is I think that's more and more plausible. I think that's certainly the case, especially since the huge gap that there used to be between the standard of living in the United States and the standard of living in Israel is shrinking quite rapidly. So I think so, and I think even if there isn't a substantive increase in anti-Semitism, there certainly is a perception of it increasing, which is fueled by the real substantive anti-Semitism in Europe.
We're just about out of time. I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about
it. Yeah, it could be that we'll see a little bit of a rise. The truth is, I hope to see a rise in anti-Semitism coming from ideology, that Israel is our home. We just had the baseball team showing Israel as the home for all Jews around the world. That's where I want to see.
I wish there were a few Israelis on that team, though.
but the point is that Jews around the world, their home team is Team Israel. And hopefully, Steve, that'll be for football also. But the goal should be not anti-Semitism out of need, because we have to, but because, I'm sorry, not aliyah out of need, but because we want to, because we recognize that Israel's our home. That's what I hope to see a rise in.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this edition of ILTV Weekly. Thanks to my guests, Dr. Martin Sherman and Rabbi Dov Lipman. This program note, I will be traveling for the next month, visiting Cuba, Costa Rica, and Guatemala. In my absence, this program will be hosted by my able replacement, Mitchell Barak. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and shalom from Israel.